Welcome to the Stoic Storyteller, your sanctuary for raw, unfiltered stories about the darker side of human nature. Here, we dive deep into the reality of life, the toxic relationships, the bitter betrayals, and the quiet, calculating art of absolute justice.
Have you ever watched a greedy person fight tooth and nail for something that will ultimately destroy them? Today, we follow a man whose toxic family forged a will to steal an empire, leaving him with a seemingly worthless plot of land. He didn't oppose to fight back. He just smiled and walked away, because he knew the empire they stole was drowning in debt and heavily targeted by the feds. Sometimes the absolute best revenge is simply letting your enemies have exactly what they want. Here we go. The Sterling family estate was a monument to old-world wealth, a sprawling, 20-bedroom limestone mansion nestled in the elite hills of upstate New York. It had crystal chandeliers, imported Italian marble floors, and an indoor botanical garden. But for the past 5 years, my entire world had been confined to a single sterile bedroom on the second floor, smelling constantly of bleach and intravenous medicine. My name is Liam. I was 24 when my grandfather, Arthur Sterling, suffered a massive stroke. Arthur was the terrifying, iron-fisted patriarch who had built the Sterling Corporation from the ground up. He was a billionaire, but when his body failed him, his billions couldn't oppose by loyalty. My family, Aunt Beatrice, Uncle Richard, and my younger brother Julian, were too busy spending his money to wipe his chin. They despised the smell of the sick room. They refused to pause their European vacations, their country club galas, or their lavish lifestyles to care for the man who funded them. So I did. I dropped out of my final year of architectural school. I moved into the estate. For 5 grueling years, I bathed him, fed him, administered his medications, and held his hand during his agonizing nights of phantom pain. I didn't oppose to do it for the inheritance. I did it because my parents had died when I was young, and Grandpa Arthur was the only one who had attended my little league games. I loved him, but to my family, love was an alien concept. To them, my sacrifice was simply a calculated, pathetic manipulation. Look at the little bedpan washer, my younger brother Julian would sneer, leaning against the doorframe of the sick room wearing a $3,000 Gucci jacket, smelling of expensive gin. Julian was the golden child. He was handsome, ruthlessly charismatic, and completely sociopathic. You think washing his feet is gonna get you the company. Liam, you oppose. A glorified nurse. When the old man croaks, I oppose. Taking the throne. I would just quietly wring out the warm washcloth, ignoring him. I knew something Julian didn't oppose. I knew the man lying in the bed wasn't oppose. Just old and sick. He was silently observing everything. As the 5-year mark approached, Arthur's health began to fail rapidly. The doctors gave him weeks, perhaps days. The moment the medical prognosis was updated, the mansion, which had been blissfully empty for years, was suddenly swarming. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Richard arrived with their entourages. Julian moved his luxury sports cars back into the driveway. They weren't oppose there to say goodbye. They were there to secure the vault. The atmosphere in the house became toxic, thick with greed and paranoia. They brought in Elias Thorne, a notoriously shady, high-priced corporate lawyer who specialized in aggressive estate restructuring. They spent hours locked in the downstairs library, drafting documents, arguing loudly over stock portfolios, real estate deeds, and the controlling shares of the Sterling Corporation. One evening, I walked into my grandfather oppose's room carrying his dinner tray, only to find Julian and the lawyer standing over his bed. Julian was physically holding a pen in Arthur oppose's frail, trembling hand, trying to force him to sign a thick stack of amended legal documents. "Just sign it, old man," Julian hissed, his charming facade completely gone. "You oppose. Heavily medicated. You oppose. Not in your right mind. If you don't oppose, sign over the executive voting rights to me right now. The board will tear the company apart when you oppose. Gone. Get away from him," I shouted, dropping the tray and shoving Julian away from the bed. Julian stumbled back, then recovered, his face twisting with rage. He shoved me hard into the wall. "Watch your hands, servant. You have no power here. I and Oppos am protecting the family legacy from a leech like you." Grandpa Arthur suddenly gripped my wrist with surprising, desperate strength. His breathing was ragged. He looked at Julian and the lawyer, his eyes burning with a sudden, lucid fire. "Get out," Arthur rasped, his voice barely a whisper, but laced with the terrifying authority of the titan he used to be. "All of you." Julian sneered, straightening his jacket. "Fine, but you can and Oppos run from the inevitable. The company belongs to me." That night, a torrential thunderstorm battered the estate. The power flickered. I sat beside Arthur and Oppos' bed, holding his fragile, skeletal hand. His breathing was growing shallower by the minute. The end was here. "Liam," he whispered, his eyes closed. "I and Oppos am here, Grandpa. I and Oppos am right here," I said, my vision blurring with tears. They think they are wolves," Arthur breathed out, a faint, bitter smile touching his pale lips. "They are just vultures. They want the crown. They want the castle." He squeezed my hand. He opened his eyes, and for a fleeting second, the fog of the medication completely vanished. I saw the brilliant, calculating billionaire looking back at me. "Let them have it, Liam," he whispered fiercely. "Let them take the throne. Let them take the mansion. They are fighting over a corpse." He pointed a trembling finger toward the bottom drawer of his bedside table. "The black wooden box," he gasped. "Take it before the lawyer locks the room. Do not open it until you are out of this house. Let the golden child wear the crown. The crown is made of lead." Those were his final words. The heart monitor flatlined, emitting a continuous, piercing tone that cut through the thunder outside. Arthur Sterling was dead. I didn't in Oppos call the nurses immediately. I honored his final wish. I opened the bottom drawer, pulled out a small, heavy black wooden box, and locked it inside my own duffel bag in my room. Then, I went downstairs to tell the vultures the feast was ready. When I broke the news, Aunt Beatrice didn't and Oppos cry. She immediately picked up her phone to call her accountant. Julian simply smiled. The funeral was a disgusting spectacle of fake grief. Julian wept beautifully for the cameras of the financial press. Aunt Beatrice wore a dramatic black veil. I stood in the back, wearing a cheap suit, the only one shedding genuine tears. 2 days later, the family gathered in the massive mahogany library for the formal reading of the will. Elias Thorne, the shady lawyer, sat at the head of the table. He looked incredibly smug. I knew exactly what had happened. Using Julian's bribes and Arthur and Oppos' heavily medicated state in his final weeks, Thorne had managed to legally override Arthur's original, fair will with the amended version they had forced upon him. To my daughter, Beatrice, and my son, Richard, the lawyer read smoothly, "I leave the entirety of my liquid offshore portfolios and the European real estate holdings." Beatrice and Richard exchanged a triumphant look. To my grandson, Julian, Thorne continued, pausing for dramatic effect. "I leave the crown jewel, the controlling 80% equity in the Sterling Corporation, and the full deed to the Sterling family estate." Julian leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms, looking at me with absolute, crushing arrogance. He had won. He was the undisputed king. And finally, Thorne said, looking down at his papers with a suppressed smirk, "To my grandson, Liam, for his caretaking services." The room went completely silent. "I leave the Blackwood Tract, a 50-acre parcel of undeveloped land in the Nevada desert, and whatever personal items he can carry in a single bag." Julian burst out laughing. Beatrice covered her mouth, giggling into her silk handkerchief. 50 acres of dead dirt and rocks. Julian howled, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "That land has been useless since the 1980s. You gave up 5 years of your life, wiped his backside, and he gave you a sandbox. You really are a pathetic loser, Liam." I sat perfectly still. I didn't in Oppos scream. I didn't in Oppos T argue with the lawyer. I simply looked at the legal document confirming my ownership of the barren Nevada dirt. Is the deed to the land fully cleared and legally transferred to my name? I asked the lawyer quietly. Yes, Thorne scoffed. It Anapos, es all yours, kid. Don Anapos. T spend it all in one place. The transition of power was brutal and immediate. The moment the lawyer left the estate, Julian stood up and walked over to me. He wasn't Anapos. T smiling anymore. He looked at me with the cold, absolute authority of a tyrant who had just seized the throne. You have 30 minutes to pack your pathetic little bags and get out of my house, Julian commanded. Julian, it Anapos. Es pouring rain outside, I said, keeping my voice level. Let me at least stay the night. I have nowhere to go. Did I stutter? Julian snapped, stepping into my personal space. This is my mansion now. The Sterling Corporation is mine. The legacy is mine. You are a stain on this family, Liam. You always have been. Security. 2 massive private security guards, whom Julian had preemptively hired, stepped into the library. Escort the nurse to his room, Julian ordered. Give him 30 minutes. If he tries to take anything that doesn't Anapos, T belonged to him, break his fingers. I didn't Anapos. T fight. I walked upstairs, packed my cheap clothes into my duffel bag, and carefully wrapped my clothes around the heavy black wooden box my grandfather had given me. 30 minutes later, I was standing on the gravel driveway outside the massive iron gates of the estate. The torrential rain soaked through my cheap suit in seconds. I looked up at the towering, illuminated mansion. I could see Julian standing in the window of the master bedroom, holding a glass of champagne, toasting my misery. He thought he had destroyed me. He thought he had robbed me of my birthright. I walked a mile down the dark road until I reached a small, flickering bus stop shelter. I sat on the wet bench, unzipped my duffel bag, and pulled out the black wooden box. It was unlocked. I opened the lid. Inside, there was no money. There was no jewelry. There was a thick, highly classified geological survey report stamped with a federal seal. And beneath it, a handwritten letter on my grandfather and Apos' personal stationery. I unfolded the letter. My dearest Liam, if you are reading this, it means the vultures have taken the bait. I lied to them, Liam. For 10 years, I have secretly leveraged the Sterling Corporation into absolute ruin to fund a shadow project. The company is completely bankrupt. The mansion is mortgaged to the hilt. Furthermore, I have intentionally evaded federal taxes for a decade. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division has the files, and they will raid the estate within months. I left Julian a ticking time bomb of $20 million in federal debt and felony fraud charges. The crown is poisoned, but the rocks, Liam. Read the survey. The Blackwood tract ISN and Apos, T dead dirt. It sits directly on top of the largest unmined deposit of neodymium and dysprosium, rare earth metals essential for global tech, in North America. I spent my last true millions securing the exclusive mineral rights for you. It is worth billions. You were the only one who loved me in the dark. Now it is your turn to step into the light. Let them drown. Avenge me. Grandpa Arthur. I sat in the freezing rain, reading the letter again and again. The cold water dripped down my face, but a terrifying, brilliant fire ignited in my chest. I looked back down the dark road toward the glowing mansion. Julian had stolen the throne. He didn't, and Apos. Tino, the castle was built on a massive, federal landmine, and I was going to sit back and watch it detonate. I didn't, and Apos. T sleep that night. I sat in a cheap, $40 a night motel room, staring at the geological survey documents under the flickering fluorescent light. Grandpa Arthur had orchestrated a masterstroke of misdirection. For years, he had publicly written off the Nevada land, the Blackwood tract, as a failed, worthless real estate investment. He let the family joke about it. He let the corporate accountants ignore it. But in the shadows, he had secretly funded independent core sampling. The documents in my hands were undeniable. The 50 acres sat atop a massive, high-grade vein of neodymium and dysprosium. In the modern world, these rare earth metals were the lifeblood of the tech industry, essential for manufacturing electric vehicle batteries, military drones, and supercomputers. The global supply was heavily bottlenecked, making this domestic deposit incredibly valuable. But I couldn't and oppose T-mine it myself. I had no equipment, no crew, and no capital. I needed a partner. Inside the black box, tucked beneath the survey, was a burner phone and a single business card. It belonged to Marcus Vance, a familiar name in the elite corporate underworld, the CEO of Aegis Global Minerals, a massive international mining conglomerate. I waited until exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, then dialed the number. Vance, a gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. "My name is Liam Sterling, Arthur Sterling and Appo's grandson. He told me to call you when the wolves took the house." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, a low chuckle. "Arthur told me this day would come," Vance replied, his tone shifting to absolute, lethal professionalism. "He said you were the only one in that bloodline with a spine. Do you have the Blackwood deeds?" "I have the deeds and the fully transferred mineral rights," I confirmed. "Good. Fly to Denver immediately. I have a private jet waiting at the regional airport. We have a multi-billion-dollar contract to draft Kid. It in Appo's time to build your empire." While I was quietly signing contracts in a high-security boardroom in Denver, Julian was throwing the biggest party upstate New York had ever seen. I kept tabs on my family through the social media accounts of the elite socialites they desperately tried to impress. Julian was playing the role of the visionary billionaire CEO to perfection. He bought a $3 million Bugatti. He threw a massive coronation gala at the Sterling estate, flying in A-list celebrities and popping bottles of champagne that cost more than a car. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Richard Warren and Appo's far behind. Assuming the offshore accounts left to them were bottomless, they immediately began writing massive checks. Beatrice bought a penthouse in Paris. Richard bought a massive yacht in Monaco. They were so blinded by greed, so utterly convinced of their own superiority, that not a single one of them bothered to conduct a forensic audit of the Sterling Corporation and Appo's internal ledgers. Julian assumed that because the company and Appo's revenue looked huge on paper, the profits were real. He didn't in Appo's. Realized that Arthur had been cooking the books for a decade, artificially inflating the stock while secretly siphoning the remaining capital to secure the Nevada mineral rights for me. Julian was sitting on a throne of gasoline, and he was happily lighting matches to celebrate. He strutted into the Sterling Corporation headquarters, firing the loyal, veteran executives who dared to question his spending, replacing them with his sycophantic frat brothers. He was the undisputed king of a decaying castle. He thought he was untouchable. He didn't in Appo's. Know the IRS was already watching. My negotiations with Aegis Global Minerals were swift and highly lucrative. Because the domestic tech industry was desperate for rare earth metals, Vance and Appo's conglomerate agreed to bear 100% of the mining, infrastructure, and operational costs. In exchange, I retained a 40% royalty stake on all gross revenue produced by the mine, forever. To initiate the deal, Aegis wired me a non-refundable, tax-free signing bonus of $200 million. I went from a homeless, grieving caretaker to a quarter-billionaire in a single afternoon. But I didn't in Appo's buy a Bugatti. I didn't in Appo's throw a gala. I remembered my grandfather and Appo's lessons. I set up a fortress of blind trusts, LLCs, and corporate shields. To the public eye, Liam Sterling was still a nobody who had vanished after being kicked out of his family and Appo's estate. I bought a beautiful, heavily secured penthouse in Manhattan, overlooking Central Park. I hired top-tier financial advisors and began quietly multiplying my wealth through aggressive stock investments. And from the quiet safety of my new empire, I watched the slow, agonizing collapse of the Sterling family. I hired a private intelligence firm to monitor Julian's corporate activities. The reports I received were poetic in their tragedy. Within 3 months of taking over, the illusion of the Sterling Corporation began to fracture. The panic started on a Tuesday morning in November. Julian was sitting in his massive CEO office when the company and Appo's chief financial officer, one of the few veterans Julian hadn't in Oppos. T fired yet, burst through the doors, his face completely pale and slick with sweat. "Julian, we have a catastrophic problem," the CFO stammered, dropping a thick stack of red-flagged financial documents onto the mahogany desk.
EPOS, Embusy, David.
"What is it?" Julian snapped, admiring his reflection in the window. "The liquid cash reserves," the CFO said, his voice shaking. "They and Oppos, gone. The accounts are completely empty." Julian frowned, spinning around in his chair. "What do you mean, empty? Grandpa had hundreds of millions in liquid assets. We just posted a record quarter." "It was a facade," the CFO practically screamed. "The revenue was artificially inflated using ghost subsidiaries. Arthur leveraged the entire company against massive, high-interest commercial bridge loans. We owe $20 million to aggressive private equity firms, and the debt matured yesterday. Furthermore, the offshore accounts left to your aunt and uncle? They were seized by international banks last night to cover defaulted collateral." Julian's arrogant smirk finally slipped. A cold, terrifying dread began to pool in his stomach. "That and Oppos." "It's impossible," Julian whispered. The estate is mortgaged to the hilt," the CFO interrupted brutally. "Arthur took out a massive line of credit against the mansion 5 years ago. Julian, the company is bleeding cash. We can and Oppos even make payroll next week. We are bankrupt." Julian was cornered. A smart man would have declared immediate corporate bankruptcy, liquidated the assets, and walked away. But Julian was a narcissist. His ego couldn't and Oppos handle the humiliation of losing the empire he had bragged about to the world. He couldn't and Oppos let his elite friends know he was broke. So he made the fatal mistake. Desperate to keep the company afloat and hide the crisis, Julian secretly took out a massive, predatory loan from a shadow banking syndicate. To secure the loan, he legally bound himself, signing a personal guarantee. He attached his own name, his own future, and his own freedom to the decaying corpse of the Sterling Corporation. He swallowed the poison hook, line, and sinker. The house of cards could only stand for so long. By December, the situation had deteriorated into absolute madness. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Richard had their European properties seized by the banks. Furious and destitute, they flew back to New York and moved back into the Sterling estate, screaming at Julian daily, demanding he give them money from the company. The estate became a war zone of toxic, greedy relatives tearing each other apart. But the final blow didn't and Oppos come from the banks, came from the federal government. It was a freezing Friday evening. Julian, in a desperate, manic attempt to project stability and attract new investors to bail him out, was hosting a winter wonderland charity gala at the estate. The mansion was filled with politicians, wealthy socialites, and Wall Street executives. Julian stood at the top of the grand marble staircase, wearing a bespoke tuxedo, raising a glass of champagne to give a speech about the unstoppable future of the Sterling legacy. He didn't and Oppos noticed the convoy of black, unmarked SUVs tearing up the gravel driveway. Suddenly, the massive front doors of the mansion were violently kicked open. Dozens of federal agents in tactical gear, wearing windbreakers with the bright yellow letters IRSCID, Criminal Investigation Division, and FBI, flooded into the grand foyer. The music abruptly stopped. The elite guests screamed and backed away in sheer terror. A senior federal agent stepped forward, holding a thick stack of warrants. He looked directly up the stairs at Julian, whose face had gone completely white, the champagne glass slipping from his hand and shattering on the marble steps. "Julian Sterling." The agent's voice boomed through a bullhorn, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "You are under arrest for massive corporate tax evasion, wire fraud, and the falsification of federal financial documents. Secure the building. Nobody leaves." The trap my grandfather had set in the dark had finally violently snapped shut in the light. The absolute silence in the grand foyer was deafening, broken only by the crackle of federal radios and the harsh, rhythmic flashing of red and blue lights outside the massive windows. Julian Sterling, the visionary CEO, stood at the top of the stairs, his perfect tuxedo suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. "This is an outrage," Julian finally shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to summon his usual arrogant authority. "Do you know who I am? I am the head of the Sterling Corporation. You are trespassing on private property. I and Oppos. LL have all your badges by morning." The lead IRS agent didn't and Oppos even blink. He walked up the marble steps, pulled Julian's arms roughly behind his back, and clamped heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. The metallic click echoed loudly across the room. "You aren't and Oppos. The head of anything, Mr. Sterling," the agent said coldly, loud enough for the terrified elite guests to hear. "The Sterling Corporation is completely insolvent. And as of an hour ago, a federal judge signed an order freezing every single asset tied to your name. You are a flight risk and you are under arrest." The humiliation was absolute and visceral. The senators, the venture capitalists, and the high society socialites, the very people Julian had desperately tried to impress, pulled out their cell phones. They were in and Oppos calling for help. They were recording him. The security agents marched Julian down the grand staircase. He stumbled, his expensive leather shoes slipping on the champagne he had dropped. He was dragged through his own gala, past the whispers and the disgusted stares of his peers, and shoved into the back of a freezing, cramped federal transport van. Through the barred window of the van, Julian watched as federal agents began ordering his elite guests out into the freezing rain. His coronation had become a public execution. With Julian hauled away, the federal agents turned their attention to the estate itself. The mansion was officially classified as a crime scene and a seized federal asset. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Richard, who had been hiding in the upstairs parlor drinking scotch, were rudely interrupted by agents kicking open the heavy wooden doors. "Everyone out. You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises," an FBI agent ordered, holding a clipboard. Beatrice, wearing a diamond necklace and a silk evening gown, shrieked, "You can and Oppos. Do this. We live here. We are the Sterlings." "Not anymore, Ma and Oppos." The agent replied. "The estate is being seized to cover $20 million in back taxes and fraudulent corporate debt." Panic set in. Richard desperately lunged for a priceless antique vase sitting on a pedestal, hoping to smuggle it out to sell later. An agent immediately grabbed him, throwing him against the wall and confiscating the vase. "Personal items only. Clothes and toiletries. If you touch the art, you will be arrested for theft of government property." 10 minutes later, Beatrice and Richard were physically escorted out the front doors. They stood on the wet gravel driveway in the freezing December wind, shivering in their evening wear, clutching small overnight bags. They looked up at the towering mansion. The lights were systematically being turned off by the agents inside. The heavy iron gates slammed shut behind them, locking with a definitive metallic clang. They had spent their entire lives waiting for Arthur Sterling to die so they could inherit the castle. Now they were homeless, penniless, and standing in the mud. The absolute, terrifying reality of their greed had finally caught up to them. Julian spent the weekend in a stark, freezing federal holding cell in downtown Manhattan. He couldn't and Oppos post bail because every cent he had access to, including the corporate accounts, had been seized by the government. On Monday morning, a tired, overworked public defender walked into the interrogation room where Julian was chained to a steel table. "I Don and Oppos want you," Julian snarled, slamming his chained hands on the table. "I want Elias Thorne. Call my corporate lawyer. I pay him a $5,000 hourly retainer." The public defender sighed, opening a manila folder. "Elias Thorne ISN and Oppos taking your calls, Mr. Sterling. In fact, he's currently cutting an immunity deal with the federal prosecutors to testify against you." Julian froze. The blood drained from his face. "Testify? Against me? My grandfather was the one who evaded the taxes. He set me up. I didn't and Oppos. Know the company was bankrupt. It doesn't and Oppos matter what your grandfather did," the public defender said bluntly. "When you took over, you discovered the insolvency. Instead of declaring bankruptcy, You actively falsified the Q3 financial reports to hide it. You lied to federal regulators. And worst of all, to keep the company afloat, you signed a $20 million predatory loan and legally bound it with a personal guarantee. The lawyer slid a copy of the loan contract across the table. Julian's own signature stared back at him. Because of this signature, you absorbed the debt, the lawyer explained. The shadow syndicate you borrowed from is demanding immediate repayment. And the federal government is charging you with massive wire fraud for the fake Q3 reports. The prosecutors are asking for 25 years. Julian stared at the stark white walls of the interrogation room. The brilliant, sociopathic golden child had been outplayed by a dying man. Arthur had handed him a live grenade, and Julian's own massive ego had pulled the pin. 2,000 miles away, the Nevada desert was alive with the roar of heavy machinery. I stood on a ridge overlooking the Blackwood Tract, wearing a hard hat and a high-visibility jacket over a tailored suit. Below me, a massive, state-of-the-art mining operation was in full swing. Dozens of massive excavators tore into the earth, unearthing tons of raw, grayish rock. The incredibly precious neodymium and dysprosium that my grandfather had hidden from the family. Marcus Vance, the CEO of Aegis Global Minerals, stood beside me, shouting over the noise of the machinery. First refinement batch ships to Silicon Valley next week. Liam, Vance yelled, grinning broadly. The yield is even higher than the initial core samples predicted. Your 40% royalty is going to make you one of the wealthiest private individuals under 30 in the country. Make sure the environmental protocols are strictly followed, Marcus, I replied calmly. We build this the right way.
No cutting corners.
I walked back to my armored SUV. Sitting in the plush leather back seat, I opened my secure tablet. My financial dashboard showed my net worth officially crossing the $1 billion mark. I switched the screen to a major news network. The headline blared across the screen. Sterling Empire collapses. Heir Julian Sterling denied bail amid massive fraud charges. The footage showed Julian, stripped of his bespoke suits, wearing a drab, orange prison jumpsuit. His hands and ankles were shackled. His hair was a mess. The arrogant smirk that had defined his entire existence was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, terrified stare of a broken animal. I watched the footage with complete, absolute detachment. I felt no pity. I felt no guilt. They had spent my entire life treating me like a servant, entirely convinced that they were royalty and I was dirt. Now, the natural order had righted itself. A week later, I was sitting by the fireplace in my Manhattan penthouse when my secure cell phone rang. It was an unknown number routing from a federal penitentiary facility. I accepted the call. You have a prepaid call from an inmate at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, an automated voice announced. Press 1 to accept. I pressed 1. Liam, Julian's voice came through the receiver, frantic, high-pitched, and desperate. Liam, thank God you picked up. Hello, Julian, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. How is the new estate? Don and Appos? T play games with me. Liam, Julian cried out. The feds froze everything. Beatrice and Richard are living in a cheap motel and they won and Appos. T even speak to me. The public defender says I and Appos am going to get 20 years. I need a real defense team, Liam. I need capital. And why are you calling me? I asked, taking a sip of my coffee. You threw me out into the rain with a single bag. Remember? Because you have the Nevada land. Julian pleaded, entirely blind to reality. Listen, I know it and Appos. It's just dirt, but you can mortgage it. Take out a loan against the acreage. Sell it to a developer for a couple $100,000. Wire the money to my legal fund. When I get out of this mess, I and Appos, I'll pay you back. I and Appos, am still the CEO, Liam, we and Appos. Brothers. He still thought I was the submissive caretaker. He still thought he was the master giving orders. I let out a slow, dark chuckle that sent a chill through the phone line. Sell the dirt? I murmured softly. Julian, that and Appos, dirt and Appos, sits on the largest unmined deposit of rare earth metals in North America. Grandpa Arthur knew about it for years. He hid it from you and he gave it to me. The line went dead silent. Only Julian's ragged breathing could be heard. I partnered with Aegis Global Minerals. I continued, twisting the knife with surgical precision. I didn't in oppose. T-mortgaged the land, Julian. I leased it. My current net worth is roughly $1.2 billion. I am living in a penthouse in Manhattan, and tomorrow I am flying to Monaco on my private jet. Billion? A billion? Julian choked, the sheer scale of the revelation completely shattering his fragile grip on reality. Yes, I replied coldly. You fought so hard to steal the crown, Julian. But Grandpa Arthur knew you were a vulture. He gave you the debt, the fraud, and the IRS. He gave me the empire. Enjoy the next 20 years in a concrete box. Liam, wait, please. I and Oppos am begging you. Julian screamed, sobbing hysterically into the phone. I ended the call, blocking the facility and Oppos' number forever. The golden child was dead. The phantom billionaire had officially risen. The collapse of the Sterling family was a highly public, incredibly messy spectacle. With Julian denied bail and sitting in a maximum security federal holding cell, the remaining family members turned on each other with the viciousness of starving wolves. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Richard, entirely stripped of their European assets and living out of a dilapidated motel near the interstate, hired a sleazy, low-budget lawyer to sue Julian. They claimed Julian had intentionally defrauded them, hoping to extract whatever hidden millions they believed he had stashed away. But there were no hidden millions. Julian's high-priced corporate defense team had completely abandoned him because his retainer checks bounced. He was left with an exhausted public defender who urged him to take a plea deal. The media tore them apart. The Sterling name, once synonymous with elite American wealth, became a punchline on late-night talk shows. Paparazzi camped outside Beatrice and Richard's cheap motel, snapping photos of the former high society socialites eating fast food in the parking lot, looking haggard and terrified. I watched it all unfold from my penthouse in Manhattan, sipping a cup of expensive black coffee. I didn't in oppose. Feel the need to intervene or gloat. The trap my grandfather had laid was so perfectly engineered that it didn't and oppose. Require my participation. It was a self-sustaining engine of destruction, fueled entirely by their own greed and incompetence. By early spring, the federal government moved to liquidate the Sterling family's physical assets to cover the massive tax debt. The crown jewel of those assets was, of course, the Sterling estate. The IRS scheduled a closed-bid federal auction for the 20-bedroom limestone mansion. It was a massive media event. Real estate developers from all over the world flew in, hoping to buy the historic property for a fraction of its true value. I didn't in oppose. Attend the auction in person. I didn't in oppose. Want the press or my family to know that Liam Sterling was back in the game. Instead, I deployed Marcus Vance and a team of my most ruthless corporate attorneys. They didn't in oppose. Bid under my name. They used a heavily shielded, anonymous holding company called Blackwood Capital. The bidding was fierce. Developers wanted to bulldoze the mansion and turn the land into a luxury golf course. But they were bidding with budgets. I was bidding with the limitless, exponential wealth of a rare earth metal monopoly. When the final hammer fell, Blackwood Capital secured the deed to the Sterling estate in absolute cash. I bought my grandfather and Oppos' legacy, the mansion Julian had thrown me out of, for pennies on the dollar. The government got their tax money. The developers went home empty-handed. And I finally held the keys to the castle. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Richard didn't in oppose. Know I had bought the house. In their desperate delusion, they had assumed that because the estate was being auctioned, there might be a surplus of funds left over after the tax debt was paid. Funds they believed rightfully belonged to them. They had driven their rented, beat-up sedan to the front gates of the estate on the day the new corporate owners were scheduled to take possession, hoping to beg the new buyers for a payout. I arrived at the estate in the back of a blacked-out, armored Maybach. The heavy iron gates were locked. Beatrice and Richard were standing outside in the cold spring wind, arguing with my private security team. Beatrice was wearing a dirty, wrinkled trench coat, her hair unkempt. Richard looked like a broken old man. My driver rolled the Maybach to a stop in front of the gates. The tinted window slowly rolled down. Beatrice rushed forward, putting her hands on the door frame. "Please, we are the Sterlings. We need to speak to the head of Blackwood Capital. My father built this house." She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes locked onto my face in the back seat. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, my voice smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. Richard stumbled forward, his jaw dropping in pure shock. "Liam, what are you doing here? Did you get a job driving for the new owners?" "I am the new owner, Richard," I replied softly. I pressed a button on the console, and the massive iron gates slowly began to swing open, acknowledging my biometric signal. "The estate belongs to Blackwood Capital. I own Blackwood Capital. I own the house. I own the land. I own everything." Beatrice let out a high-pitched, hysterical gasp, stepping back as if she had been burned. No, that and Apo's. "Es impossible. You have nothing. Julian took it all. Julian took the debt." I corrected her, signaling the driver to move forward. "Grandpa Arthur gave me the Nevada land, and the land made me a billionaire. Enjoy the motel, Beatrice." The Maybach rolled through the gates, leaving them screaming and weeping in the dirt road outside. The gates clicked shut behind me, sealing them out forever. The Maybach pulled up the long, sweeping gravel driveway. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the towering limestone mansion. It was perfectly quiet. There were no fake friends. There were no screaming relatives. There was no smell of bleach or sickness. I unlocked the heavy mahogany front doors and walked into the grand foyer. The federal agents had stripped the house of its art and expensive furniture during the seizure, leaving it beautifully, cleanly empty. Felt like a massive, blank canvas. I didn't in Apo's. T walked to the small, sterile servant in Apo's bedroom on the second floor where I had spent 5 years of my life. I walked straight up the grand marble staircase and opened the double doors to the master suite, the room my grandfather had commanded his empire from, and the room Julian had so arrogantly claimed for himself. I walked over to the massive bay windows that overlooked the sprawling, manicured gardens and the deep forest beyond. I took a deep breath, the suffocating weight of my childhood, the years of verbal abuse, and the endless days of being treated like a peasant in my own family's home completely evaporated. I pulled out my cell phone and called my lead architect. "We begin tomorrow," I instructed. "I want the entire interior gutted and rebuilt. Erase every trace of Julian's tacky renovations. Bring the estate back to the classic, powerful aesthetic my grandfather originally built." I hung up the phone. I wasn't in Apo's. T just moving back in. I was erasing their history from the walls. A week later, I sat in the back row of the federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan. The courtroom was packed with journalists. This was the highly anticipated sentencing hearing for the golden child of Wall Street. Julian was led into the courtroom wearing a faded orange jumpsuit. He was shackled at the wrists and ankles, shuffling awkwardly toward the defense table. The physical transformation was shocking. Without his expensive tailors, his personal trainers, and his arrogant swagger, Julian looked small, weak, and pathetic. He was trembling. The federal judge, an unforgiving man with a reputation for handing down maximum sentences to white-collar criminals, looked down at Julian with absolute disgust. "Julian Sterling, the judge and Apo's voice boomed through the quiet room. "You inherited a precarious financial situation, yes. But instead of acting with integrity, you chose to engage in massive systemic fraud. You lied to regulators, you defrauded private lenders out of $20 million, and you used corporate funds to maintain a sickeningly lavish personal lifestyle while your company burned to the ground." Julian kept his head down, tears silently dropping onto his chained hands. "Your actions show a complete lack of remorse and a sociopathic level of greed," the judge continued, slamming his gavel. "For the charges of wire fraud, tax evasion, and grand larceny, I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of early parole." A collective gasp echoed through the gallery. Julian's knees buckled. 2 federal marshals had to physically hold him up by his armpits. As they dragged him toward the side door leading back to the holding cells, Julian looked up. His desperate, hollow eyes scanned the courtroom. His eyes met mine. I was sitting in the back row, wearing a bespoke suit, looking completely calm and untouchable. I didn't inapos. T smile. I didn't inapos. T sneer. I simply looked at him the way one looks at a stranger. Julian's mouth opened in a silent scream of absolute, soul-crushing despair as the heavy wooden door slammed shut behind him, locking him away from the world for the next 2.5 decades. The golden child was dead. The throne was mine. The physical reconstruction of the Sterling estate took 6 months, but the moral reconstruction took much longer. I didn't inapos. T just want to paint the walls. I wanted to exorcise the ghosts of arrogance and cruelty that had plagued my family for decades. I fired the snobby, elite estate staff that Julian had hired and replaced them with hardworking, genuine people who were paid double the industry standard, complete with full healthcare and tuition assistance for their children. I transformed the oppressive, dark downstairs library, the room where the lawyer had read the fake will and Julian had banished me, into a massive, sunlit architectural studio. I finally finished my degree online, using the space to design affordable, sustainable housing communities that my new philanthropic foundation would fund. On a quiet Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year after my grandfather's death, I walked through the restored botanical indoor garden. The air smelled of fresh jasmine and damp earth, completely free of the sterile scent of bleach that had defined my 20s. I carried a small marble urn containing Arthur Sterling's ashes. He had an apos. T wanted a massive, gaudy mausoleum. He had wanted to rest in the garden he built for his late wife, my grandmother. I buried the urn under a beautiful, sprawling, weeping willow tree. The castle is clean, Grandpa, I whispered, placing my hand against the rough bark of the tree. The crown is broken. You don't inapos. T have to worry about them anymore. I inapos am building something real. The leaves rustled in the wind. For the first time in my life, standing in the massive, echoing estate, I didn't inapos. T feel like a servant. I felt like the master of the house. Karma is not a sudden explosion. It is a slow, grinding decay. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Richard, completely stripped of their wealth and blacklisted by every elite social circle in New York, were forced to face the brutal reality of the working class. A class they had spent their entire lives mocking. I didn't inapos. T have to hire private investigators to find them. A local news outlet did it for me. They ran a Where Are They Now? Segment on the fallen Sterling dynasty. I watched the broadcast on the television in my studio. The camera crew had tracked Beatrice down to a massive, sterile corporate laundry facility on the outskirts of the city. The woman who had once spent $10,000 on a single handbag was now wearing a drab blue uniform, standing on her feet for 10 hours a day, aggressively feeding soiled hotel bedsheets into a massive industrial steamer. Her face was lined with deep, permanent exhaustion. Richard was working as a nighttime toll booth operator on the New Jersey Turnpike. The footage showed him sitting in the cramped, freezing glass box, mindlessly taking quarters from passing truck drivers, his eyes completely hollow. The reporter asked Beatrice if she had tried reaching out to her billionaire nephew, Liam, for help. Beatrice stopped folding the sheets. She looked directly into the camera, tears welling in her tired eyes. We didn't inapos. T just lose our money, she said, her voice trembling with absolute regret. We threw away the only person in the family who actually knew how to love. We deserve this. I turned the television off. She was right. They had dug their own graves with golden shovels, and now they had to sleep in them. There was one last thread to sever before I could truly move on. I flew my private jet to the maximum security federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. I was escorted by armed guards through a labyrinth of heavy steel doors until I reached the secure visitation block. Julian was brought out in his faded orange jumpsuit. The physical toll of federal prison had aged him 20 years. His perfect, gelled hair was gone, shaved close to his scalp. He had a faded, purple bruise on his jawline, a testament to the brutal reality of a place where money and corporate titles meant absolutely nothing. He sat down on the metal stool behind the thick, bulletproof glass. He picked up the heavy plastic phone with trembling hands. "Liam," Julian rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "He didn't inapos." T sneer. "He didn't inapos." T command. He just looked at me with the desperate eyes of a drowning man. "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice perfectly calm. "Why are you here?" he asked, a tear slipping down his bruised cheek. "Come to gloat? Come to show me your custom suit?" "I don inapos." "T need to gloat, Julian. The suit is just fabric," I replied. "I came because I wanted to look at you one last time. I wanted to see the man who thought he was a god." Julian lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. "It inapos. Es hell in here, Liam. Absolute hell. I have 24 years left. I dream about the mansion every night. I dream about the champagne. Then I wake up on a steel bed. Please, you have billions. You can hire the best appellate lawyers in the country. You can get me a retrial. I and Appos. I'll do anything. I and Appos. I'll scrub your floors. You wouldn't in Appos. T last a day scrubbing floors?" I said softly. "You thought my sacrifice for Grandpa Arthur was pathetic. You thought caring for another human being was a weakness. But that and Appos, weakness and Appos, gave me the strength to survive you. Your arrogance was your prison long before they put you in this cell." Julian pressed his hand against the glass, sobbing openly now. "Liam, please, we and Appos. Blood." "No, Julian," I said, hanging up the phone and standing up. "We just share a last name." I walked out of the visitation room. Julian screamed my name, pounding his fists against the bulletproof glass. But the sound was muted, distant, and entirely powerless. The heavy steel doors slammed shut behind me, locking the golden child in the dark forever. I returned to New York, the heavy weight of the past finally lifted from my shoulders. I threw myself into my work. The Aegis mining operation in Nevada was producing record yields, and my net worth was climbing exponentially. But rather than hoarding it offshore, I deployed it. I launched the Arthur Sterling Caretaker Foundation, a massive philanthropic fund dedicated to providing financial grants, free healthcare, and mental health support to full-time family caregivers across the country. I knew the agonizing, silent sacrifice of wiping a loved one and Appos' brow in the dark. Now, I was using the earth and Appos' most precious metals to make sure those silent heroes never had to suffer in poverty. One evening, I was attending a quiet charity gallery opening in Manhattan to support local architects. I was standing in front of a brilliant, intricate sketch of a sustainable housing complex when a woman stepped up beside me. She had warm, intelligent brown eyes, wore a simple, elegant black dress, and had a smile that felt instantly familiar, like coming home. "It Appos. A fascinating design," she said, studying the sketch. But the architect forgot to account for the western sun exposure. The second-floor atrium would be an oven in the summer. I smiled, genuinely impressed. "You have a sharp eye."
Appos, Liam.
"Maya," she replied, shaking my hand. "I and Appos am a structural engineer, and I happen to know that the man who funded this gallery opening is a phantom billionaire who hides from the press. He prefers to let the work speak for itself," I said softly. We talked for 3 hours. We talked about architecture, about the crushing weight of grief, and about the beauty of building things meant to last. When I looked at Maya, I didn't and Appos. See the opportunistic greed that had defined my family. I saw a partner. I saw a future. 2 years later, the Sterling estate was alive with light, music, and genuine laughter. It was a warm summer evening. Maya and I were hosting a massive dinner party on the sweeping back lawn. But the guests weren't and Appos. Senators, venture capitalists, or elite socialites. The guests were the nurses, the social workers, and the struggling families that the Caretaker Foundation had pulled out of poverty. Children were running through the botanical gardens. A string quartet was playing lively, joyful music. The estate was finally fulfilling its true purpose. It was a sanctuary. I stood on the massive stone balcony of the master suite, looking out over the sea of happy faces. Maya wrapped her arms around my waist from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. "You built something beautiful here, Liam," she whispered. I reached up and held her hand, looking out at the sprawling, illuminated property. I thought about the dark, freezing night I had been thrown out of these very gates with nothing but a single bag and a heavy wooden box. I thought about the sheer, suffocating terror of having no family, no money, and no future. My grandfather had known that the only way to forge unbreakable steel was to thrust it into the fire. He had given Julian the illusion of power, knowing the poison of greed would inevitably destroy him. He had given me the dirt, knowing I had the strength to dig until I found the gold. I kissed Maya's hand and smiled. The ghost of the abused, pathetic caretaker was gone. The toxic dynasty was dead and buried. The phantom billionaire had finally stepped into the light, and his reign had only just begun.
You fed me lies with poison lips. I bled from every sinking ship, but now I rise with sharpened grace. You'll see the venom in my face. You broke my wings, I grew my claws. Now hear the wrath behind my cause. I've got a venom heart, tearing your world apart. You built your throne on hollow truth. Now feel the fire of my youth. No more tears, no more regret. I'm the storm you won't forget. You played the game, you pulled the strings, but I'm the chaos fate now brings. I won't be silent, won't be tamed. You'll scream before you say my name.